hung this door in my shop about 6 years ago, and I never put a lock in it, typical of a door hanger or a carpenter in his own home. I've always wanted to put a mortise lock into this door, something that would give me a little extra security, but I never came across an extra one off of a job. But what I did come across just recently is a multi-point lock, and I decided that's what I'm going to put into this door. They're kind of costly. This one's probably worth about $100 and $150 or something, maybe more now. They vary in price depending upon all the bells and whistles you get with them. The one I got here is pretty simple, and I'm going to go through the steps of installing it into this door. The neat thing about multi-point locks is when you turn the handle, they automatically throw a slide bolt from the top of the door into the top of the jamb and from the bottom of the door into the threshold. And you can turn a bolt up here so you can have 3 points of security, the deadbolt here and the 2 slide bolts top and bottom. But to install one of these things takes a little extra patience. I'm going to go through all of that in just a couple of minutes. The first thing we have to do, though, is measure this door so we can cut the lock to the right length. I'm going to measure from the top of the door down to the bottom of the door, but I'm not going to measure the door itself. I'm going to measure right to the top of the door shoe, which doesn't hit the bottom of the door. It's about 1/8 of an inch below the bottom of the door. It's about 79 1/16 of an inch. I want to make sure that the slide bolt mechanism just hits the bottom of that door shoe so that when the slide bolt slides, when I throw it, and it penetrates this gasket on the bottom of the door shoe, it doesn't have to go too far before it runs into this threshold, because that slide bolt only has 3/4 of an inch of throw. This gasket is about 1/2 an inch thick, so if I get the housing for the slide bolt right up against the door shoe, it should work out perfectly. I got this door in my door bench now, and I've hung a temp door in that opening so we don't have that sunlight coming in here. I also brought in this mock-up. This is just a piece of stock that's 1 3/8 thick and about 8 inches wide, at least it was when I started out. I've mortised this lock set into this piece of stock several times just to dial my router setups in precisely. I suggest you do the same thing before you put a router bit to a good door. I want to check this out real close and show you exactly how this works. I've just thrown together a little Allen wrench here to help function this lock. But let's start looking right here at the bottom where the bolt projects off the bottom of this mock-up, just like it would the bottom of a door. Like I said when we were measuring this, we don't want the end of this lock to be flush with the bottom of the door. We want the end of the lock to project a little bit out the bottom of the door and almost touch the inside edge of that door shoe. And that way, this slide bolt, when it's thrown, will project as far as possible off the bottom of the door, penetrate the gasket on the bottom of the door shoe, and reach all the way inside the threshold. Now let's look at the mortises that have to be cut into the door. You'll notice that there's 3 steps in the mortises here. Let's get in here real close and take a good look. The deepest mortise is right here, and that's so that the bottom of the slide bolt has something to rest against. You don't want to make this one too deep, or when you install the slide bolt, won't be flush with the face of the door. The second depth we have to cut is this one right in here. This depth is just so that the traveling linkage, which is underneath the lock, that serrated piece underneath the lock, doesn't hang up on the face of the door. Now the third cut we have to make is the shallowest cut, and it's right here. And you see it runs all the way out here, but most of it's gone because we've cut through it for the deeper mortises. But this shallow cut here is only for the thickness of the faceplate. So the faceplate here has something to sit on once you've mortised the whole latch into the door. The mortise at the top of the door is almost identical. Let's take this slide bolt off and disconnect it. And there's that linkage again. You can see underneath here this serrated linkage. And let's look up underneath here a little bit. Notice that because the top slide bolt is so much longer than the bottom, you have to make this deep, deep mortise all the way up to here, which is about 8 inches from the top of the door. And also you can see the secondary step, which is going to support the faceplate itself, just the thickness of the faceplate. And finally, this third mortise, which is just the depth for the linkage itself, so that the linkage will travel underneath the faceplate without pinching, without the faceplate pinching the linkage against the door. We've got one more mortise to cut, and that's this one here. This is the mortise for the lockbox itself. The box is about 2 1/4 inches deep here, so this depth has to be about 2 1/2 inches. It's a pretty easy mortise to cut because you can use the same router setup. In fact, we're going to use pretty much the same router setup for every single one of these mortises. You can do this job with one router. The only problem is you have to switch bits. And I'm lazy, but actually I'm just really spoiled. I've got the Festool 1400 router here, and I've also got the 2200. In the 1400 router, I've got a 3/8 inch spiral cutter, and I'm going to use that just to make the shallow mortise for the traveling linkage. Now, in this router, I've got a 5/8 inch wide bit, and it's really long. I'd used a spiral cutter in this one too, but I couldn't find a long enough one that was 5/8 of an inch wide. It has to be really long in order to reach the bottom of the pocket mortise for the lockbox. Both of these routers are set up with these with the plexiglass fences that Festool makes. Now, these things are just awesome. They're really ideal for anything you have to do to the edge of a door or the bottom of a door. They're great for installing auto bottoms, and they're great for cutting mortises like this. There's only one thing you have to do, and it's really simple. You have to make sure that they're dead centered on the edge of the door. And the way I did that is pretty simple. I just took a little guide here and scored a line right down the center of the door and checked it to make sure that it was dead center from both sides. And then I take the router and the fence, set it right on top of that, and loosen up both fences and slide this top over until the score line right in the top of the router fence is sitting right up on top of my pencil line on the door. And that's it. That's all you have to do, and then tighten these down. Now, sometimes you'll find that if you tighten them down too snug to the door, the router won't slide. You want it to be able to slide without too much trouble. In fact, if you look closely here, I've modified this fence a little. I've put some slippery tape on both sides of this fence so the fence slides even easier on the face of this door. Now, let's adjust this next one too, so they're both adjusted exactly the same, because we're going to ride both these routers down the door, and we want these mortises to be perfectly centered, so the step that's created between the 5/8 bit and the 3/8 bit is also centered. Let me scoot this over just a little, and that'll do it. Before we can cut anything with a router, we have to lay out how long we want these mortises. This one here will be at the bottom of the door for the bottom slide bolt, which stops right about here, and it's at the furthest point of its travel. So I can make a mark right here, and I'll take that line and I'll continue it across the door with a square in just a second. Now let's mark the bottom of the lockbox right here, and the top of the lockbox too, which is right up here. So we'll just put a couple little marks right there. Now we can lay out the top slide bolt on the top of the door. And remember, for the top slide bolt, we want it to be flush with the top of the door, whereas the bottom slide bolt is going to hang down just a little bit. Now this linkage right here, I'm going to mark the bottom of it. Watch this. This linkage moves up and down, so it travels. So you have to make sure that this mortise is long enough to clear that, and it moves in the opposite direction. Notice that? It moves in the opposite direction of the throw bolt. So if we bring that mortise down, let's bring it down a little farther. So we'll bring it down to about here, and that'll be more than enough room. And as you can see, here's that serrated traveling linkage again, and it meets and mates right inside of this one here, just like so. So these two snap together pretty easily.